going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are here for the finale of the main stories for Innistrad Midnight Hunt, Episode 5, Night Closes Round, once again by K. Arsenal Rivera. My quick review at the top of this one is, I thought this story was good. I thought it got its point across. It got us to where we needed to be. I liked kind of the ending, but otherwise I don't think there were like massively impactful moments necessarily where I'm going to be remembering it for years to come. But like I said, I still think it was a well-written story, and it definitely got us to the point where we needed to be. That's a little bit more than a quick review, but that's my review. What about you, Amy?
Okay, my quick review is that I have a lot to say about this one. I think it's really important to read. I liked it. Yeah. I kind of agree that it's not, like, full of plot points, you know? It's got, like, one main plot point.
Right.
But that plot point is the climax, right? So it's arguably the most important plot point, and I think how they got there, there's a lot to say on it. So I think it's a must read.
Okay, very good. So then we will move on to the full review itself, but first, obviously, we would like to remind all of you that if you have not gotten a chance to read this story yet, we have tried to remove as many barriers as possible. So one of the things that we do is we put the link to this story in the description down below. It is the top link in the description. So based on those quick reviews, if you have not gotten a chance to read it yet and you are interested in doing so, feel free to follow that link down below. Go read the story for yourself. And then, of course, we would love it if you would come back here and join us in giving your opinion in the comments down below, continuing the discussion no matter what. And then also the last thing I should do is, hi, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget while you're here on our channel to subscribe and ring that bell. Exactly. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you all so very much for being here. Please don't forget that we have other channels as well. Links down in the description box below. Video Games for All, which has 3 uploads a week. And if you missed it last week, we even have a channel called Gluten Free for All, which is linked down below. And it stars one of us. And you just had a video come out last week.
Yeah.
So definitely go check that out, and don't forget to subscribe, ring the bells there as well. Liking and sharing helps as well. Welcome to YouTube if you're unaware of how that works. You know, the algorithm or whatever. It's helpful to us if you like the things that we do. We would love to have more people see it. And so those are the ways to do that. And we really appreciate any and all support that you're willing to give.
Yes.
And last but not least, we are live on stream every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. This Friday, we will be starting our new long-term stream playthrough on Fridays for video games with X-Men Legends for the PlayStation 2. So if that's something that interests you at all, we would love it if you would join us this Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We'll be taking a week off for the Crimson Vow pre-release,
yes.
So be aware of that. And then we'll be back after that for the foreseeable future. And then on Mondays, if you're unaware, we play MTG Arena. This past Monday, we actually had a 7-win draft deck in Innistrad Midnight Hunt.
It was sick.
Really, really cool. So you can check out that VOD on this channel or come watch us live. We're amazing Magic players. Don't worry about it. But anyway, on to the full review itself. Again, thank you all so very much for being here.
Yeah.
I really liked the start of this story. It was an italicized flashback section. You had some bits to talk about with that, but I just wanted to talk about the fact that it once again mentions Arlen's pack. It mentions like Boulder and Streak, and talks about, makes it a point to say, they are very loyal. And they're constantly there and loyal to Arlen, which all of us reading it now know they're not anymore.
Right.
And obviously then going forward in the story, we hear more about how they are not loyal or how not loyal they currently are. And it really helped set the tone, in my opinion, for how the rest of this story was going to go. It's like, hey, by the way, there are no happy endings here.
Right.
Be aware of it, so that even if there's that moment of hope of like, well, even if my parents, this is Arlen in the flashback, even if my parents don't accept me with open arms, I at least have the pack to fall back on. Nope, you don't get either of those, Arlen. Suck it. Like, that's what this story started off with, was saying, by the way, you get neither of those things, and you're going to have to deal with that.
Well,
and
she had to make her own way.
Right.
You know.
But we had the benefit of being there after the fact to know where that was going, right? Arlen, simple-minded, or not simple-minded, I guess that's unfair, but naive in her beliefs of like, they're so loyal, we're fine, no one's ever going to break us up.
Well, I don't think that's naivete necessarily, so much as just, you know, assessing the current situation and not being able to foretell what's to come.
Yeah, and hindsight's 20/20, I suppose,
Exactly.
so that makes sense, yeah.
I'm sorry, did I, like, hit you? Or
No.
Okay, it seemed like you went like this when my hand went up.
No, you're good.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I just did instinctively, I didn't even notice. But yeah, I don't know if you... So we talked about the fact that that part of the story, that flashback, it seemed to me, it seemed to us, a little hinky in what it was talking about. That, like, Arlen goes back to where her house was, and now it's not there anymore. It's been, like, burned to the ground. And Arlen's like, oh, maybe something happened with the forge. Well, it can't be helped. And kind of, like, goes off on her own. But I don't know if you want to...
It's kind of messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, it just, like, both of us were like, so is that really what happened? Or is it Tovalar?
Right. And then we kind of got into a short discussion of like, oh, like, you know, cult mentality of like, I want to keep you in my clutches, so I'm going to literally burn to the ground all of your other lifelines and relationships.
Yeah, I wrote taking away her support structure
in order to control her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And win her allegiance simply by taking away all her other options.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the packmates. We hear about them. We hear about at least two of them, like I said, in the flashback section. Now we get to them in the story itself. We find out that Boulder, Streak, and Redtooth are kind of against her, actively fighting against her, and that Patience is at least just off to the side. And I felt like that section was a little bit unclear, that it felt like maybe the wolves were communicating with her, but really it was just Tovalar the whole time, and the wolves, her wolf pack, were like there and attacking her, but Patience wasn't. So did Patience walk up, and was it Patience who like brushed against her hand? It felt like it was that. I think it might have necessitated a second read just to like, there was a lot going on. And the story even mentions that Arlen says there's too much to focus on in that fight section. That, like, she's busy fighting Tovalar, which is tough in and of itself, but then she's got Boulder coming up behind her, biting into her shoulder, like, trying to drag her down, and, like, Streak is there, and Redtooth, and whatever. And then, like, then she has to be aware of the fact that, like, Patience is off on the side because she can smell her, but Patience isn't attacking, so that's another, like... Her reference is then split even further. Tovalar's talking, but Arlen can't quite make out what he's saying. So, like, I mean, whether intentionally or not, the writing did a very good job, I think, of making that whole section seem very confusing, because there wasn't a lot of, I felt, or sufficient descriptive language or use of the names of the different wolves or characters that were around to give you an indication of who was doing what, when, where, and how. And again, if that was written because we're supposed to be from Arlen's perspective and Arlen doesn't know where the bite from behind her is coming from because she's focused on Tovalar in front of her or whatever, then that much makes sense to me, I guess. But it was still kind of confusing to me.
I think it's perfect that you say that, because I was trying so desperately in that section to kind of try to think back. I even asked Joe to like go back and reference one of the old stories that had more information about the wolves in it, so that I could like remember the descriptions that were given of each singular wolf, to kind of try to think about their characteristics, like their personality, if you will, of each of them, and how that affected this fight. And I think the information that we had to work off of, both in this story and that one, was just a bit too vague for me to really go that route. But I think it's perfect that you say that, because it's very reminiscent of, okay, now she's in this fight-flight sort of situation, and she's flooded. You know, she's just, thoughts are conflicting, her surroundings are conflicting, and everything's happening all at once, and it's hard to understand what's going on. And it's hard for her to, apply logic to this situation, because this situation is, in my mind, trying to depict, or trying to mirror, I guess, what's going on in her mind when she thinks about and feels what she feels for Tovalar and the pack.
Okay.
So, this like physical fight that's happening is sort of mirroring this sort of conflicting thoughts and feelings that she has for these people in the first place. Not people, but Tovalar and the pack.
Her packmates, yeah.
Right.
Former packmates. Yeah, and so, I mean, there's a couple of things to talk about off of that. First of all, I'll say, going off of what you were talking about, I feel like, and I get, there's limited space, etc., and there's so many instances of Magic fans latching onto a character that was mentioned in a story and not given a card, and so now it's like, what set are we finally going to see this card in?
Right.
These wolves kind of scream to me like uncommon legendaries, right?
Oh,
that like if they were to exist, which I don't even necessarily think they need to exist in card form, but if they were to exist in card form, I think they could be good uncommon legendary creatures. But regardless of any of that, I feel like there was a bit of a missed opportunity, right? These characters, these wolves, kept coming up multiple times in these stories because they're very important to Arlen for obvious reasons. Right. And if that's the case, I wish we'd gotten more from them or about them. Yeah. And I'm not even saying that in terms of like, well, I guess the next time we come back to Innistrad, we're going to... No. Give us the... Because this was their introduction. So to have given them more personality or discussed it more, maybe it would have been... I guess I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. In prior reviews, when we have talked about these wolves, I mentioned that the Pax Betrayal section got me a little bit. I got a little emotional from that. Imagine how much more impactful it would have been if we had had the opportunity to get that much closer with them through Arlen's relationship with them. How much better would that have been? How much cooler would that have been for us to be able to see that?
Yeah.
And like Amy said, in these moments where it's the climactic final battle and they are jumping in and holding her back or fighting her or whatever, to be able to say, oh, classic Boulder, he's the one to go in and grab her from behind. Good thing Patience is on the side to like reassure Arlen and like stay out of it and etc. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too greedy in like asking for too much. And again, as with anything that we talk about, I would love people's thoughts on that. Did you feel that you were connected enough and you wouldn't want more on the wolves, or do you think that we could have gotten a little bit more from them in that regard?
So I've already obviously said that I wanted more on the wolves so that I could make this connection that I'm trying to make here, which is basically that Tovalar and the wolves kind of represent this sort of cult mentality that Arlen kind of fell prey to. So all of the emotions and the actual actions that they do are all based on this sort of instinctual, reactionary mentality that they have. They're not, again, like I said before, able to apply logic to the situation. They're flooded with emotion and unable to differentiate enough to say, this is Arlen. I don't want to kill her. I don't want to hurt her. Because they are in fight or flight.
Right.
And patience being separated from them is representing the fact that it is representing that logic, that state of mindfulness that the rest of them aren't able to be in, right? She's patient. So she's...
It's her name, yeah, for a reason.
Right, so she's... But patience doesn't mean she's waiting off on the side for her moment to strike.
No.
Patience means an acceptance for the reality of the people that these characters are.
Okay.
I'm saying people meaning the truth of their personalities.
Okay.
Right? As opposed to the impulsiveness of their actions.
Right.
So this wolf is aside because the other wolves and Tovalar are acting on those instincts that they're feeling right now, as opposed to Patience, who is able to sit on the outside and see it from a more logical, mindful place, and have some understanding and some love, not only for Arlen, but also for the rest of them, despite the fact that they're fighting Arlen.
Well, and we talked about it a few weeks ago in these stories as well, that it's the idea that Arlen struggles with a lot of the comparison between her being raised in the church versus being raised by Tovalar, or not being raised, but being like taken in by Tovalar and the wolf pack, is that the church tells you, okay, you have these instincts, they exist, now ignore them, tamp them down, because it's not proper, it's not right to give in to those types of instincts. Meanwhile, Tovalar's response is, screw it, do whatever the hell you want. If you feel like you want to go out and hunt and kill, go do it. And so, similar to what you were talking about, Patience is the one who's actually, I guess, learning from Arlen's influence combined with her own personality, as her own, wolf-like personality, in that she's able to sit back and say, no, I don't have to attack her right now. Meanwhile, Streak, who's always running all over the place, and Boulder, kind of the same thing, and then Redtooth, I guess, being Streak's partner, they're all right up in it, facing her down for that reason as well.
So, I guess what I would say to that is, like, I don't think Tovalar's saying go ahead and do whatever you want. I think Tovalar's saying, do what I want you to do.
Sure. I think it's just like, if you make them lose their inhibitions, or you make them never question any of their feelings, just acting on whatever is presented to them, it kind of takes that away more so.
Yeah. He is abusing her. He's taking away her agency. And saying, no, you are a werewolf, therefore you must act upon these instincts as opposed to applying logic.
Right.
And acceptance and love to things.
Yeah. Don't think about it, just do it.
Right. And Arlen says, no, I apply acceptance, logic, compassion, love, and therefore I will fight these instincts to eat people or rip them apart or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, she was a little upset in the last of these stories that we read.
Right.
when seeing those bodies torn apart.
Yeah. and we'll get into that later on when we get into the quotes that I have written here.
Well, and in fact, not necessarily a quote, but something from that section that is really important to touch on is during that whole fight between Tovalar and Arlen, Tovalar keeps taunting her. And so, again, another thing for her to have to focus on. He keeps saying to her, just come home. Come home to us. Tell me you're coming home, and I'll stop killing you. I'll stop fighting you. Just come home.
That's exactly the part I was referencing, too.
There you go.
So there
Good.
you go.
Good.
Yeah,
because I had that written
so
here.
he's trying to continue that, like, continuous, strenuous gaslighting that he's putting upon her, right? And saying, just come home, just do this. But what he isn't realizing is that that's not what home is. Well, he realizes that because he's the abuser, right?
Right.
But
what he hopes she doesn't realize.
Right. And she does realize it because she says, what does she say?
I mean, we didn't write down the quote, but she talks about...
Oh, we didn't?
I don't think
sorry.
so. No,
I thought we wrote the specific quote.
No. But she says, like, the wilds are home, right? The woods, these wolves, Innistrad is home, all of that stuff. So
yeah, I thought patience is home.
Right. And so technically, she tells him, I am home. Like, in other words,
right.
To him, seeming like she's acquiescing. She's finally giving in, which draws him close. He like hugs her, and that gives her the opportunity to deal what would be considered the killing blow. Not in that it kills Tovalar, but that it ceases that attack and causes him to understand that it's now time for him, at least, to retreat, which then will allow us to continue on with the rest of the story. But, she like puts her hand into him, essentially, and so he has to leave because now he's got an owie.
But yeah, like he talks about home, he talks about belonging.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is that patience is off on the side.
Yeah.
Which indicates Arlen's awareness of the fact that his gaslighting isn't home. Being part of this cult or this gang mentality isn't belonging.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Home and belonging are what she gets from the woods and patience and just living on Innistrad and being part of it and being able to affect change enough to have a purpose.
Well, I was going to say protecting it, being one of its protectors.
Right.
Because she knows it's worth it.
Right.
To do so.
And that gives her purpose.
Yeah.
And belonging.
And belonging, exactly. Absolutely. And so that to a degree leads us into right now Tovalar's gone. And now Arlen is kind of assessing the situation around her, and she starts talking about her parents, and that leads to the quote. Do you want me to read the quote, or you want to read the quote? Okay. So there are some ellipses in here. I'm just not going to read the ellipses, but be aware this is not, we jump around slightly.
Pieces out.
Slightly, but not a ton. But this is a quote from the story. They, meaning Arlen's parents, they never would have attended, muttered that safety lay in isolation. Then, as now, she knows what they really meant, that safety and fear were one and the same. They're wrong. Everyone keeping to themselves, thinking about themselves, that's how Innistrad got here. Vampires, climbing toward eternity on the backs of the mortal. Werewolves, hunting the people they should be protecting. Division caused this. Had the wolves realized the importance of keeping day and night in balance, they could have protected the festival instead. And then, a little bit later, reaching out, staying together. It's the only way to go.
Right. So this quote was really important to this through line of home, belonging, and escaping this gang mentality, this cult mentality, this gaslighting. She didn't feel that sense of belonging with her parents either. And this paragraph tells you why. And it's because her parents were, in essence, no better than Tovalar, in that they felt isolation was the only thing safe to do, the only right way to go.
Yeah.
And she says they're wrong. Togetherness, caring, acceptance, learning how to solve problems in a more complex manner or a more integrative manner, where people can be of a community as opposed to deciding to isolate themselves, deciding to only care about themselves, because that's the mentality that causes issues of wars or terrorism, which is what I think this story is kind of akin to, right? This sort of like attacking of the festival, right?
Sure.
Is very much playing in my mind as like a terrorist attack.
Well, it was.
If you want to make it akin to something from today.
Well, because I'm definitely going to tie this quote into something from today, but I'll give it a moment. But yeah, I mean, if you think about the fact that it was even mentioned in this story, the festival was supposed to be a moment of hope. And it turned from a moment of hope into a moment of terror. Yeah. You had people screaming, running for their lives, seeing people killed, seeing their loved ones killed, dying themselves, whatever the case may be. It's 100% a terrorist attack. Absolutely, that's what it was. And it was meant to instill fear in those people, to basically say, how dare you have gotten together to try to feel good about something. Mm-hmm. And so here's what you get. You get terrorized.
Right. And her point is not, kill all people with the mindset that my parents had or that Tovalar has. Her point is, if they were only able to see the reality, the importance of all of this, they could have protected. They could have had the same purpose that she has. And the only reason why they felt this need to make this terrorist attack, basically, is because they have no sense of purpose. They have no real sense of belonging. They have no real sense of home or patience or compassion or love or connections that they would get from that lack of isolation that she was referencing.
Right.
Her parents talking about. Those human connections are so important in creating that purpose for each individual. Because that lack of purpose for an individual makes it so that an individual has nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you're essentially the Joker, right? You just want to watch the world burn.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything inside your mind is already burning. It's already on fire, and the fire never goes out.
Right. So you might as well make the outside look like the inside.
Right.
Okay.
So once you have that wisdom that she talks about here, let me see if I can find the specific spot that I really want to say here.
This was the big quote.
Yeah, they're wrong. Everyone keeping to themselves, thinking about themselves. That's how Innistrad got here. That's how we got to this terrible spot that we're in.
To needing to have these people come together for this moment of hope because they were otherwise without it. I mean, don't forget, I'll give you a chance to read that while I say, don't forget, Avacyn. Avacyn was literally called the Angel of Hope. And then Hope died.
Right.
Emrakul corrupted Hope. And Sorin had to wipe out Hope.
Yeah.
And so this was their moment back in the sun, which they were trying for.
Division caused this. Had the wolves realized the importance of keeping day and night in balance. So the key words there are the importance of keeping the balance, right? So here it's saying day and night, but in reality, right, it's just about keeping the balance of, I guess, just life, right?
Sure. Life versus death, yeah. I mean,
when you're, well, it's not versus death, it's versus being an abusive person.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Gotcha.
So that balance is gone. That purpose that I talked about a second ago is gone. That belonging is gone. That home is gone. And if those things had been there, then they would have decided that it was important to keep the balance and protect, as opposed to wanting to watch the world burn.
Yeah.
So, reaching out, staying together, it's the only way to go. So, again, that human connection, right? Those connections are what give you that sense of purpose and home and belonging.
Right. And the reason, like, that quote, the reaching out, staying together, it's the only way to go, was following Chandra reaching down from Adeline's horse to pull Arlen up. But it's irrelevant. That phrase was not reaching out for Chandra, staying together with the Gatewatch, it's the only way to go. It didn't say that.
Right.
There's a reason why it didn't say that.
Right.
Because it's just, that's an overarching concept, and in that moment, it happened to be Chandra
Right.
and
Because
Adeline.
it's symbolism
Exactly.
instead of,
Instead of literal.
Right.
Instead of literally, that's what she's referring to. So yeah, I mean, very, very well done in that part, in kind of bringing everything together and kind of shining a light on that principle.
Right.
talking about that section, right? Just even the line "division caused this," right? And everyone keeping to themselves, thinking about themselves. That's how Innistrad got here. You know, you were saying bringing this into real world experiences like a terrorist situation or a terrorism situation.
Or a war.
Right. But I would argue, I mean, we live here in the United States. And the day that we're filming this is the day after one of our election days. That brings a fair amount of division throughout the country and has, I'm not saying it hasn't in the past, but it feels to me, and maybe it's just because of the prevalence of it these days, but it feels like it's more extreme than it has been in the past recently. And by recently, I mean, you know, last, whatever, five plus years or so. And there's a lot of division, and there's a lot of hatred towards other people for their beliefs or their feelings, whether that is because you don't like them or whether it's because, for any multitude of reasons that I won't necessarily get into. I'm sure that many of you, even if
specifics aren't important.
Right. And even if you're not in the States, global news being what it is, I'm sure you're aware of at least somewhat what I'm referring to.
Well, and so that's the problem, is that people think that those specifics matter, but they don't.
But so that's my point, is that when I read this, that's immediately what I thought of. Mm-hmm. It was like, you know, there's so much going on, and division is what's causing this feeling of, well, the only way is to focus on me. You got to focus on number one, screw everybody else, because nobody else is caring about me, so I'm the one that has to care about me. And that's a terrible way to live in a community, the word that Amy used before. It's a terrible way to be a part of a community, is to sit there and say, you know what, me. I'm the one who I have to focus on myself. And that's not to say that people who think that way are automatically wrong, by the way, because unfortunately, if that's what everyone around you is doing, then, again, no one's helping you. Who knows?
Well, they are wrong.
Right.
But the problem is the lack of education to know the correct thing to do.
Well, and the lack of support, right? For whatever that may mean to you.
And that's the point of this,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Is that isolation isolates you.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough.
Wow.
Shocking. From the ability to have those connections that give you purpose and give you meaning in your life, and therefore isolate you from the ability to live in a community.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a terrible way to live in a community. It makes you unable to live in a community because you have no sense of community at that point. Right. You only have a sense of what is important for you. And realistically, what's important for you at that point isn't what you have a sense of anyway.
Right.
Because the things that you do for yourself when you're selfish are not things that help you be a better person. They're things that help you be a worse person. So ironically, when you're only helping yourself and only caring about yourself and only doing things for yourself, you cannot improve. And so, and I agree that isolation and that division keeps increasing as we go in this world. And it's because there's so little education, like I said, of these principles that I'm talking about here. These principles are things that should be taught in school to kids. Very much need to be taught to adults, and all throughout our lives, they need to be reinforced. They need to be enforced. Mm-hmm. They need to be referenced. They need to be part of our vocabulary and part of our understanding of the world as a whole. And the fact that they're not is what causes that division.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a good transition to what is next to discuss here. I was trying to find it and I couldn't, which is fine. Sometimes there are bad transitions, and here's one. So
we've gotten more macro with what we're talking about here in politics, sort of. So.
But now we're going to go much more specific and go back to the story. We're up to the section where we get to the Celestis itself. We get to the witches and their chanting and etc. And there's this quote here that you wanted me to write down about that.
Right, but this isn't. To me, this is macro because. To me, this is referencing history.
Okay.
And sort of the sort of timeline of how history and culture and religion has sort of interwoven throughout just the timeline of the world, basically.
Okay.
And people.
Fair enough. So then we get to with the chanting, there's this quote here. This, meaning this chant that's going on here, this ritual, this is nothing like a hymn, nothing like a prayer. It's something different, but just as real. How is it that the words spring so readily to her lips when she's never heard them before? Have they been etched on her bones all this time?
So, so cool. This writing is so good. This quote is great because this quote is very much, it's interesting. I was a little confused when it said, this is nothing like a hymn. This is nothing like a prayer. And I was like, how is it not? Right? Because, in this, right, in Innistrad, I guess you would say, this religion that they talk about, this sort of like Abyssinian religion.
Sure. The Cathars, etc.
Right. It is very closely mirroring, say, the Christian religion in the actual scope of history, if you want to tie it to reality, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think here with this, they're saying it's nothing like a hymn, it's nothing like a prayer, as if to sort of say it's like this old world sort of way of going about things. So like prior to Christianity and the way that Christianity and or possibly just monotheism as a concept sort of changed the way that people responded to wanting to have more agency and more control over the supernatural and what the sort of things that us nowadays would try to say you can't have any control over.
Okay.
So I think I think polytheistic religions were much more along the lines of what they're trying to make you understand this is like. Mm-hmm. That this chanting and this spell casting that they were doing mirrored much more the feel of a polytheistic religion as opposed to that of a monotheistic religion. I think that's what they were trying to go for with that line.
Okay.
But in my head, I was sitting there going, how is it really that different? Because older religions informed the newer ones, right? All of that chanting and that spell casting that they were doing was, again, to have control and agency and be able to affect the supernatural or the world around them in a way that not doing so couldn't affect, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that in reality wasn't actually affecting those things the way they thought they were, right? If the spells were ineffective, we'll say it that way, that didn't matter as much as the belief that they were effective. Does that make sense? Like, in their minds, doing those things equaled having that control or that agency or being able to affect change, whether those spells actually worked and did things or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying they did or did not, either way.
Yeah.
But their belief that they did was what, like, informs newer religions and prayers and hymns, because those things are in essence the same sorts of things, right? Trying to affect change, involving the supernatural, trying to say, okay, God or whomever, please do X thing that needs to occur because it's important,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or singing praise to God in a hymn is you trying to say, you're greater than each one of us, right? Your power is more than I, right? So
mm-hmm.
you have the ability to affect change when I don't. So it's the same sort of thing where, like, the chanting and the spells and the rituals are all them trying to, like, take the reins a little bit and say, like, okay, we need to keep the day-night balance,
mm-hmm.
right? So we're going to try to do this ritual, this old magic that's going to keep that balance, right? Or fluctuate it in some way in our favor, right? And a monotheistic religion would do the same sort of thing with a hymn or a prayer, where you're asking for that change to occur, or that balance to be restored, or whatever it is, of someone who you feel has more agency than you. So it's the same sort of thing, but I think that line was trying to kind of differentiate that, like, old versus new,
right?
Sort of that sort of, like, I think there were just a lot of things that tried to, like, make you aware of how old this artifact was, old this magic needed to be.
They said it like 15 times or something. It was ridiculous. I mean, it wasn't 15. Maybe like 3 to 5 times, which is a lot. It's very repetitious.
In order to interact with this old artifact, in order to restore that balance, because that balance is such a, again, sort of supernatural thing, or such a, so much more of a that's bigger than me kind of thing. Right.
I had 2 more things that I wanted to talk about that were kind of frustrations for me, and then I feel like we can end on this last quote for you, which will kind of bring us full circle with the trauma discussion.
Okay.
I think. 2 frustrations that I had, actually. First of all, in that section with the chanting and etc., there's the art for Secrets of the Key that's shown, because it's the moment where Arlen is, first of all, standing next to Teferi and working with the Moonsilver Key. So, a couple of things that make that art completely inaccurate to the story that it's showing. Completely inaccurate. Teferi is barely mentioned, and I'll get to that in a second. Teferi's barely mentioned in that section as to where he might be in that moment, but he sure as hell isn't standing right next to her. That's first. Kaya was, but Arlen was not. Or Teferi was not. But secondly, Arlen, in the art for Secrets of the Key, looks perfect. No issues with her whatsoever. She doesn't have a wound on her shoulder. She's not dying from blood loss. She's not woozy from that whatsoever. The story literally says that she has one good arm because her shoulder's so messed up. And yet in the art, she's just like, la-di-da, just messing with the thing. Now, I understand why. So before you say, well, Joe, it's because I get it. It's the new method of storytelling. The art was commissioned so much longer before the story was written, which is my feeling on it. I'm not certain 100%. I have no inside knowledge, but the story gets written and the art gets commissioned, and never the two shall meet. Right? They know the broad scope of what the story is going to look like, and so the art is close,
but not really.
Arguably, it
but if they
focuses on the same event broadly.
But if they knew the timeline of the story, that they were going to be dealing with this key after this fight was going to occur.
Doesn't matter. They may not have known the extent to which Arlen was going to get injured. That may have been something that Kay Arsenault Rivera had the ability to kind of make that whatever she wanted. So it's not necessarily that it was that at all. I have no idea. But because we're not told, it's just like, oh, wow, that art sucks in comparison to, and again, I don't mean the quality or the style of the art. Please don't get me wrong. The skill is fantastic.
Right.
But
we're not saying the artist is bad. We're saying the art direction, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. But again,
or the lack of communication between the two departments.
It's just a lack of communication. But that's always been the case. Right. We've made multiple videos on that. Mm-hmm. But it's frustrating because that's a story spotlight card. And so someone who has not read the story, who looks at that art, will have a completely different understanding of what happened in the story than those of us who have actually read it. Right. Because Arlen's like half dead, not even working with the Moonsilver Key. She doesn't have it ever.
Right. Even
though in the art it's like right in front of her. She doesn't have it. Catilda has it. Or Kaya has it. Or whatever. At any given time. Arlen doesn't have it. And Teferi's not there. And that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. And that frustrated me. Teferi is in this set. Teferi is in the side story with Ren and 7. Or Ren and 6 and then Ren and 7. Right. We reviewed that story already. But Teferi's not in this main story.
No. He's
just not. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, where I was like, oh, I would have liked to have seen more from Teferi here. I don't know if, like, if I needed it necessarily, like, I understand, but it was all, oh, well, Teferi's over there, it must be very difficult for him to keep slowing the sunset. Oh, the sun has officially set, I guess Teferi finally gave up. So it was all, like, third hand, not even actually knowing what's going on, but Teferi's got to be there, right? Guys, we needed an Azorius Planeswalker, so it's Teferi. And so here he is. Let's talk about him, but not actually talk about him in the story.
Yeah,
he's not in this story
way.
at all. He's not there. Like, if you had just said, oh, the sunset is going very slowly, I don't know why. Like, he didn't need to be here, and he wasn't used in this main story at all. Because in this story today, not even just because he's in the art but not in the story, again, it's just more assumptions of what's going on with Teferi. Arlen looks around, doesn't see him, and then is like, he probably wouldn't have been able to help me anyway. He's probably way too tired from slowing the sunset. And that's the end of it. That's the only thing we hear about Teferi in this whole story. It's like, this is the finale.
Yeah, nobody's like dragging him along or
nothing.
Checking to see, or like carrying him, or like just seeing, oh, okay, you good? You can walk and just come with us and it's all good. Like no one's checking on his status or dealing with what that status is.
Right. There's no knowledge whatsoever. And again, in my opinion, he might as well not have been there.
Okay.
Chandra was well in this story. I mean, again, it was a lot of like, she's fighting. She's with Adeline, she's doing whatever, but if you talk about moments where she was on camera, aka where she was being discussed and you could kind of picture in your mind what was happening with her in any given moment because it was being described of like she was throwing her hands in the air and shooting gouts of flame or whatever. That happened multiple times. So Chandra was here multiple times. Kaya, same thing. Teferi? Nope. It was all assumptions based. It was never like, I looked over there and saw Teferi and he's doing X, Y, and Z. Okay, moving on. Nope.
Yeah,
it was
like
all, he must be doing this or it must have been this.
Yeah, it's hard to know if he was even in the room.
Right. Yeah, so that frustrated me a lot because it's like, again, very clearly, R&D was like, we need a planeswalker, let's have Teferi be here, he's on the plane. And then the story team was like, whatever, fit in Teferi where you can, he's got to slow the sunset and then fuck him. Like, it really was just, it really seemed like that entirely. It was just like, where was he? Just wasn't involved at all. So I'll be curious to see, right, when we go into Crimson Vow, which in 2 weeks is when we will start the Crimson Vow reviews, don't worry. I'm curious when we go into those if, like, Chandra played a big part in this story but wasn't a card in this set, but she still was on the plane. And now we know that Chandra Dressed to Kill is going to be a card in Crimson Vow. And so, because of that, I wonder if Teferi will be more prevalent in Crimson Vow stories and Chandra will not necessarily be, to kind of swap it around. I doubt it.
Even it out.
I doubt it, because from what we've seen from card previews so far, and I will admit that I have not been very up on the spoilers, but I've seen a fair number of them. I have not seen a single card that has shown Teferi, has referenced Teferi whatsoever. So I guess we'll see if he shows up, if he plays any meaningful role whatsoever in the stories, let alone, again, in the cards themselves, either art, flavor text, what have you.
Well, I mean, Chandra's gonna need a date to this wedding, right? She gets a +1.
She should take Kaya, and everyone knows it. If Nissa's not around, because she's not for this particular one.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so then we can move on to the final quote.
This is not going to be around to be Chandra's date anymore because, you know, gayness is, you know, just not something that's okay, apparently, for the...
the international community,
Yeah.
for certain members of the international community. Governments, really. Okay, so the last quote for you...
Crap.
Yeah, well, if that was unclear from our other videos and how we were just talking about it now, if you needed to know where we stand.
But we're sitting down.
Jesus. Nicely done. Thank you for bringing that, a little bit of levity to that. So the final quote that we want to talk about, again, first of all, let me say, and I hope all of you will join me in saying it, but thank you, Amy, for your injection of knowledge into these stories, of helping me even. I mean, we've talked about things in our personal lives, of understanding trauma and trauma responses and etc. But still, with the discussions in these stories, there are still things for me to learn. I'm sure I know there are still things for you to learn as well. And
I constantly am.
Yes, rightfully so. But being able to take that, look at these stories and pass that along to folks who are watching as well. So
I hope it helps.
Yes. So in advance, I'll be the first to say thank you for that. But let's move on to bringing this to a close, so to speak.
Well, thank my therapist.
Sure.
She's really good.
So the quote is, by the way, she, in this context, will be referring to Arlen Court. If she moved a little faster, would it have been so bad? If she had acted sooner? If she had chosen something else? What would have happened?
Yeah, I just wanted to write this quote because it's such a, like, common grief response.
God, yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that a situation like this absolutely is a situation involving grief. I mean, yes, a lot of people died here, so maybe you can make that parallel easily. But there's more to that, right? It's deeper than that.
Well, because it's grief over failure as well. I mean, Arlen went out with a particular goal in mind, and at the end of the whole situation, she had to look around and take in her surroundings of, okay, watch the sun set for the last time ever, because it will never rise again as far as she's concerned.
Right. Or at least there's no proof of that being able to be the case, right?
Yeah.
In this current moment. And so that is there's a grieving process associated with that. There's a grieving process associated with this wisdom, this knowledge that she has, that so many other people surrounding her are so wrong about. Just the knowledge that they need to have to be able to sort of rise above all of this other nonsense, and to prevent the continuation of the terrorism and the constant danger and the lack of belonging and purpose and community. All of those things, her having that knowledge is great on the one hand, but it sucks on the other hand, because now she's grieving the fact that other people not having that knowledge causes so many problems, and the effects of those problems are so are traumatizing events in order to, or not in order to, but continue to, in that situation, just propel that forward.
Right.
The trauma creates the issue of not having that awareness and that belonging and that purpose, and that begets more trauma, and it just keeps cycling on and going forward like a snowball rolling down a hill that never ends. Like a mountain that is taller than time.
I was just going to say
right?
time, yeah.
A mountain that is taller than time, and there is a snowball rolling down it.
Well, Teferi would be able to help with that, but he's not around, so...
Right, well, and he's so injured from the sun thing.
He's probably so injured.
But yeah, it's this grieving process of all of these people died, which perpetuated this mindset that people will get in that will make them decide these choices of choosing isolation and terrorism over that of protection and community.
Yeah. We talked about a lot of stuff today. and honestly, I mean, thank you for everyone who was here for any of it, all of it, whatever the case may be, because this was important. It was the final main story. And as I hinted, next week we will be back with the final side story for Innistrad Midnight Hunt, and then we will immediately follow it up with our thoughts on the Crimson Vow stories. And we'll start with episode 1 of the main story of Crimson Vow and go from there, same as we did with these. So we will start, I think it will be the week after pre-release, or the Thursday after pre-release weekend. And so it kind of works perfectly.
Nice. Yeah.
I think it works perfectly for us. And we will then go week by week, one story at a time, as we did with these, so that we may go over a little bit. You know, it'll take us a couple of weeks to finish it off, as you can tell. But regardless, if Wizards is going to bombard us with stories, we're going to take our sweet ass time. So hopefully you all have been enjoying those stories. Hopefully more so you've been enjoying these reviews, because we really do appreciate you taking the time, staying here, hanging out with us, and giving us your thoughts. Because to give us your thoughts on discussions with regard to these stories that take us to religion, terrorism, trauma, etc., is
the
honestly
history of humanity, kind of.
Right. Is honestly a great way for you to join Amy and I, mostly Amy in those situations, but still, I'm happy to be a part, that you can join us in showing off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
And again, Amy, thank you for educating me, at least, if not everyone else as well, at least me, in a lot of these things, because it brought a lot more depth to the stories, I think, when you're able to put them in that perspective. So
well, and that really speaks to the story and how great it is.
Yeah.
The depth of the meaning that it has.
Yeah.
Not just for me, but for people as a whole, right?
Yep. Just
reality, life, for human beings, and like I said, the history of humanity, because it would be just as poignant to ancient civilizations as it is to us today. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So
because it's this universal aspect of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And I talked about it here with this story, how important it is for people to know this. Because not knowing causes so much division, like you said, or like the story even said, that it essentially makes the world fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's you know, it's the difference between humanity living on and being able to see ourselves as opposed to an us and a they. And there's really nothing more important than that. Nothing.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, what other note could we end on? Thank you all so very much for joining us, for watching. As I mentioned at the top, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. We hope that you will be back with us next week. You can get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. Check out our other channels, our other videos, etc. Thank you so very much for being here. And for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.